Hello everybody. Tonight we're working on Chapter 3. We're still in Unit 2 in our course shell, and this is the last chapter in that unit, and it's really, one of the introductory chapters. We initially learned a little bit of a background about Rails and Ruby. We learned about some of the Ruby fundamentals in terms of language. We got everything installed and up and running. Hopefully everybody's in that situation now so that we can start working. And Chapter 3 is about building the beginning phases of the project that we're going to work on through this course. And basically what we're going to be building is what they're referring to here as a blog. And the reason they use a blog as a construct is pretty simple. It really represents a lot of the capabilities that you seek when you work on an interactive or a content management system. It has a lot of the features that you think about. And if you think about what a blog is, it's really kind of a way to publish yourself, right? To be able to create articles and content and repeatedly. So you would take, you'd come up with a title for something, you create some content for it, maybe throw in pictures or links or something like that. And then in addition to creating the content, which gets stored in a database, you also have the ability to interact with that content. So certain people would be able to just look at it. Some people would be able to comment on it. Some people would be able to go in and edit it or create it or destroy it, right? So if you think about the mechanisms required to do all of those things, it's actually a somewhat sophisticated thing. So you have to be able to create the content, store it in the database, retrieve it from the database dynamically, be able to edit the content, and if you're qualifying who has what rights to do whatever to that blog entry, that would require some sort of a login system and users and user accounts. So there's a lot of little components that need to be built, and the beauty here is that some of that happens fairly automatically, but there's a lot of understanding that really kind of goes underneath all of this that's important. And so it's not just about like quickly creating the project, because you'll see with a few keystrokes create something as we already have, but then getting it to do certain things and behave in certain ways, that takes a different level of skill. So we're really going to be combining a bunch of different skills, and most of the stuff that's happening in this chapter is really kind of a microcosm of the entire book in a sense. So what I'm doing here on the left-hand side on my PDF reader is I'm kind of expanding the chapter topics here so you kind of get an overview of the whole thing. And so part of it will be to create the application, creating databases that go with the project, working with models, working with database tables, generating a controller, doing some scaffolding, adding a bunch of fields, adding some validations, and then looking at the files that are generated by all these actions. So really it is like a small microcosm, as I said, of kind of an overview of what we're doing for the whole course. So there's a lot of different steps that happen here. Once again, I just want to give you a reminder that this was written with Rails version 3, I believe, or excuse me, Rails version 4, as the title of the book implies. And we are now running Rails 5. Ruby that's running underneath is also different, so we should be expecting the fact that some things might not output or behave exactly the same way, because when we move from version to version of a programming language, there's reasons why they do it, and just because we get something that looks different on our screen doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. They just opted perhaps to display things a different way. So if you get a different output than what you see in the book, that would be why. Now, before we begin any work, I want you guys to get into this habit with Ruby of getting your tools at hand and getting yourself ready to do some work. So one of the first things that we're going to do is, if you have a copy of the PDF, remember you can get that right from the course shell, I would suggest opening it up. I would recommend that you use the Acrobat Reader or Adobe Acrobat, the full-blown product, to work with your PDFs. It's just a little bit more elegant, allows for some features that browser-based ones don't. You should also get yourself a a file folder window open and ready, and I would recommend that you go ahead and you navigate right to where your project folder is on your hard drive. Mine is in the root of my C drive, and if you followed any of my examples, I assume that yours are too. And the reason I do that is we're kind of going to use kind of a hybrid approach. We could hypothetically do all the file management and all the activities directly from the command prompt, but sometimes, frankly, that's a little bit cumbersome. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of each. Sometimes it's just quicker to get to things and navigate to stuff, through the graphical interface you're already comfortable with. But it's wise to have that window open and go right to the project folder, and you're all set to go. The other thing that you should do is you should go ahead and bring up a command prompt. So go to your start menu, type CMD, or if you want to type out the whole command prompt thing, go for it. And my typical pattern for this is I'll open at least one command prompt window. In fact, as we progress through the night and we start actually running a live website and then doing things to it, I might actually have two windows open. The reason I do that is I have one to type various commands, either at a Ruby prompt, a database prompt, or a traditional prompt, and then the other prompt might just be running my web server. And what you'll discover is sometimes you do need to restart your web server, sometimes you don't. Depends on the kind of changes and things you're doing with it. There's also probably a good idea that, I don't know how you guys take notes, if you do it on pencil and paper or if you don't even bother. You might want to have some pencil and paper handy to write certain things down. The nice thing about listening to a video like this is you can always rewind. And I'm working directly from the book, so you're not going to miss anything there in that regard. Additionally, when we start digging a little bit deeper into the database aspects of building Ruby applications, I'm going to start recommending a couple of tools for you guys to explore. One of them is called the SQLite browser, and in fact, maybe now is not a bad time to just go ahead and look for that. So if you just go to a browser, go to Google, and just do a quick search for SQLite browser. It's just a very nice little compact application that's designed for allowing you to look at SQLite databases. And SQLite is going to be the database that sits in the background behind our applications during development. And what I discovered in class is, in order to make a kind of a connection for people, like if you've had your advanced database class, which you guys should have already, and if you haven't, make sure you take that class because there's a lot of concepts that you might be missing a little bit. We can do all this work from the command prompt, so we can look at all our database stuff right from a prompt. But for those of you that are familiar with working with MySQL, yes, you can do all your SQL commands from a prompt, but sometimes it's kind of nice to have that phpMyAdmin or MySQL Workbench, a graphical tool that looks a lot like SQL Server Management Studio, where you can visually see the tables and do edits and run scripts and things like that. And the primary reason that we're going to use it is to check our work as we're working. So, for example, if I make a change to the database and I'm not really sure it's stuck, right? I can bring up this tool and then look inside the database and see what happened, or see if maybe I typed something wrong, that type of thing. So it's just a handy little tool. It's free. It's multi-platform. This is the web page for it, SQLitebrowser.org. So there you go. And you don't have to grab that now, but it is a handy tool, and I really like using it quite a bit. Okay, now off to the book, and let's start digging into some concepts here. All right. One of the things that we're going to build right off the bat, as I mentioned, is a blog. And he mentions here in that first sentence of that paragraph how WordPress and now owned by Google, the Blogger platform, are kind of like the two platforms that really kind of got blogging up and going. And we're looking back, good 15 to 20 years almost for when this stuff was really starting to kick in. And that was really kind of the initiation of what we call the Web 2.0 era. And I think some of you probably heard this little spiel from me before. The Web 2.0 era was really kind of defined by the fact that the early era of the web, it was a static web that you really couldn't interact with. You consumed content. You went to a website, you looked at stuff, you read it, and you moved on. There was not really much for you to do there. When they introduced blogging, it gave people the capability to do a lot of the things that we're about to do now, which is create accounts, create content, not just read it, but you can read it and create it. You can comment on things and interact with people. So that's a pretty powerful thing, and it's really kind of the staple, backbone, if you want to think of it that way, for a lot of the social media things that we do, because that's exactly how they operate. And what fun would social media be if you couldn't interact with your friends, right? It wouldn't be very social at all. Yes, sir. Okay, so we are going to create a blog application, and what we're going to do is, if everybody's all set to start typing commands into their machines, if you're on a Mac, bring up your terminal. If you are on a PC, bring up your command prompt. And I am going to be using the book here as a guide, so I am going to try to split screen myself here somewhat to keep everything within view, within reason. And it, for some reason, ended up on my second monitor here. Got to hit the right keystroke commands, I suppose. And then I will do a little bit of an adjustment here. And there's a shortcut key for those of you not aware of this, Windows people. If you hold on your Windows key when you're in the application and then hit your left or right arrow, it'll push the application to one half side of the screen and then pull up that other screen like you just saw, where you can choose what's going on the other side. And then if you hold down the Windows key and press the left and right arrow keys repeatedly, it'll shift them even between your monitors and adjust it. A lot of people don't know it, so I like to point those things out. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do, and what we want to do, is navigate first to our project folder. So let's type cd space backslash, press enter. That drops us down to the root. Remember, if I go too fast, it's okay to slow me down. If you really let me go, I can start going really, really fast and you'll never catch up. And get into like the production mindset. All right, now we want to change into our project folder, and you can just type cd projects if that's what you called yours. And I'm going to give you another handy little tip, but if you type a portion of a name and then hit your tab key and keep hitting your tab key, it'll actually cycle through all the things that start with those letters and save you a little bit of typing. I wish they had that in the old days of DOS. All right, so now we're in the projects folder. Now I'm going to just very quickly issue a directory command, and the dir command is just simply a way to take a look inside the folder. Remember, I asked you to also open up a file folder on your operating system like this, and then if you want to make sure you're in the right place, you can notice that hello and test1 are two folders inside of my project folder, so it looks like I'm in the right place. And now I'm moving that off to my second screen. All right, so the command that we need to type is listed right here. So we're going to type Rails new blog. Once I press enter, it's going to invoke the engine, and it's going to start spitting commands or responses out to the screen like the ones that are in this little section of the book. And I do want to reiterate, whenever you see here the ... that doesn't mean that's what you're going to get on the screen. That means there's just more. There's going to be a whole bunch more. And the stuff that's inside these two gray lines here, this is not stuff you're typing. The stuff you type in as commands will either be next to a $sign, and the $sign is the prompt symbol that's on most Linux and Unix-based machines. So that's the indicator that you're typing your command. There's a couple of other prompts we're going to be dealing with too, but we'll learn about those as we go. So now that you know that, I'm going back over to the command prompt here. I'm pressing enter, and we're just going to be patient as it goes ahead and starts to create all the resources. And notice right now what it's doing, it's running a command called bundle install. And what bundle install does, I want you to remember, is it goes out and downloads and installs any components required by the framework for the project. And if you, once again, scroll up, and this is a repeat from last week, I realize that, but I want you guys to get this incorporated in your head. This is kind of the equivalent of if you were working in Visual Studio and you go to the NuGet package manager and you add a resource. So like if you want to add the jQuery library, right? You go there, you find it, you click install, it goes out there and it pulls it in. So running a bundle install is doing exactly that, but the bundle that it's installing are all the things that are required by a standard Ruby project. So in other words, those things aren't just automatically there. It goes out and downloads them fresh if there's a fresher version than what's already incorporated in the Ruby and Rails framework that's already on your machine. Those of you that already know a little bit of .NET programming, right? And those of you that know a little bit of Java, you guys should know both at this point. And I'm not talking like expertise level here, but when you think about a using statement, that's a statement that we use when we're in C# and you're importing a library of some sort. So for example, if we were in Java, we might import like the scanner utility so that we can get stuff from the keyboard. Or if we were in C#, we might use like some of the system libraries to be able to do certain types of interactions. This is essentially the same type of thing. So really, that's what it's indicating here to you. All right, so once again, we're left at a prompt. And notice what the author's doing here. And notice, clearly, he's working on a Mac, right? You can tell by the way the folders look, right? And I'm going to go back now to my projects folder. And then you can see inside that project folder how I now do have a blog folder. And what I'm asking you to do at this point is the same thing the author's asking you. And that is, open up that folder and just take a look around. Now, you could do this from the prompt. It's a little bit more cumbersome, but it's a whole lot of stuff that's created automatically. Now, the type of view that you guys are seeing up on the screen, I'm going to tell you, I think is pretty important too. In Windows, when we're looking at a file system, there's a couple of things that at this point in your educational career, you guys are either like third or fourth semester people at this point. Ideally fourth semester. This is a fourth semester class. You should know a lot about this stuff already, and I really shouldn't have to lecture you on it, but I do find that some people get little gaps in their knowledge, and I'm not saying this stuff here to be kind of like condescending or punitive, if you will, about like what your knowledge would be for managing a file system, but there's better ways to use these tools than others. The one thing that you guys really, it's really, really critical for you guys to know, if you are working in Windows 8 or Windows 10, your file folder window typically will be obscuring that ribbon bar by default. Depending on who pre-configured your machine, some computer manufacturers have their file folder windows so that they pre-show the ribbon bar and some don't, but the default is that it's hidden. And you guys are seeing how I'm turning it on and off. There's that little down arrow right here. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's going to help me with the next step of what I'm about to do. And that is I'm going to click on the View tab here, and then I want to draw your attention to this little checkbox. It is pretty critical if you're using Windows, especially as a developer, that you guys turn on your file extensions. This is something I teach like week 1 and 2 of like Web 1, and usually like any first like programming language in first semester. And I would hope that other people that are teaching you are showing you the same thing. But if your file extensions are hidden, it really hampers you quite a bit, because we are going to be looking for specific file extensions, and in some cases with Ruby we do multiple file extensions, and it's just the way kind of the language operates, especially with the embedded Ruby files that turn into HTML files. So make sure you have that checked. If you're using Windows 7, if you're using an older machine, there's actually a spot that you can turn on file extensions. And I'm not going to show that right now. At this point, I'm assuming that most people are moved on from 7. If you really get stuck and don't know how to do it, Google it. But you do need to see your file extension, so make sure that that is turned on. So as you kind of look through here, notice some of the files that are listed in certain places, and just try to make a mental note. I'm not expecting you to memorize this file structure, but I guarantee within a couple of weeks of all the stuff that we're about to start doing, you're going to start memorizing where stuff is. A lot of the work that we're going to do is going to end up being in the app folder. So if I double click the app folder and go in there, you're going to notice that there's folders for the controllers, the models, and the views right there. And then a few other things. There's helpers, jobs, mailers, channels, assets, and all of them have very particular purposes. And all of them will come pre-populated with some files as standard. You will learn where those are over time. But the point is, it creates a pretty extensive folder structure. Now the same thing happens if you guys were using the .NET platform and built an MVC application using ASP.NET. It would also pre-populate a whole folder structure for you. In Visual Studio, some of that stuff is obscured from you. And in fact, you have to go to Show All Files in the Solution Explorer to actually see them. But they are there. And it's the same type of structure. In ASP.NET, if you do an MVC application, you have a model folder, a views folder, controller folder, and other folders named in a similar fashion because they really do use the same conceptual approach to build these applications. All right. The author at this point has a little section where he shows what the purpose of those folders are, typically. And well, not typically, well, always. Remember, Ruby and Rails work on convention over configuration. This is just how they do it. And so that it tells you what those are. I'll let you read that for yourself. Like I said, most of the stuff that we're going to be doing is going to be in the app folder. We will find ourselves in the config folder from time to time, and then obviously working with some of the other files that's necessary. All right. So here it's telling us that our first stop is the config directory. So we're going to be looking for something in the config directory, and it's a certain file. So let's go ahead and pull up our file folder window, and I'm going to drop down to the root of the project, so the root of the blog folder, and then inside that folder there is a config folder. Open that one up, and then inside there you're going to see that we have a database YAML file. And here's why I was asking you guys, please turn on your file extensions, because if you don't see that YML at the end, and it might, granted there's no other database files, but what if there were, right? Now, in terms of what tool you should use to look at it, well, I'm going to tell you what, any text editor you want to use, that's up to you. Notice the one thing I just did kind of accidentally triggered my mind to tell you about one thing that you should also do when you're working with the Windows file folders is get yourselves in the habit of not being in views like this. The icon view, because it's not very handy, frankly. Not for doing development work. My favorite is to work in the details view, both because it creates a organized list and because you can access things like, for example, what date something was modified, and that's often a really good sort tool for finding things that you just changed. All right, so what I'm going to end up using, at least at this point in the class, is I'm probably just going to use Notepad++. So I'm going to take that database YAML file, give it a right click, command click on a Mac, and go ahead and open that up in Notepad++. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look inside. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and then pull it off to the side here and just do a comparison basically with what is in the book. So that's what I'm hoping that you will do as well.
Would you say it's a little different?
It is. Now remember, it is different, and the reason it's different is because we are working with different versions of the product. So for the most part it should be similar, but in this case we are noticing some differences right away. You notice that inside here what we're really doing is we're defining where our databases are for the various modes of development. So we're actually in development mode. Development mode means where you might be on an individual machine running its own web server, like we are, like a standalone PC or a standalone Mac or Linux machine. This is not going to be the web server that pushes it out to the world. Now, conceptually though, you guys should understand, if you wanted to turn your machine into a web server, you could. As long as you know how to route internet traffic to it, you could actually make this machine the web server if you wanted. But that's not the case. So there's 3 development modes for databases that are typically used. One is development, which is the one that we're going to be using pretty much exclusively the whole time. There's also the production mode, and the production database can actually be a database that is different than the development database. So we might do our development work on SQLite 3, and then when we actually push it out as a live application, we might opt for MySQL, or a SQL Server, or Oracle, or whatever. Could I use one of those other databases to do my development work? The answer is yes, provided you know how to configure it and connect to it. Then there's also a test database, and sometimes what we'll do is when we're doing development work is we'll actually develop test applications. And there's actually a chapter in this book on testing your application and running test scripts. And that chapter, sometimes we make it to that chapter and sometimes we don't in this course, just so you're aware of that. And if there's one I skip, that's usually the one I skip, because I'm more concerned with getting the work done than showing you how to do the testing. But test-driven development, TDD, you will see that if you guys look for job listings, that is a really hot thing. There's a lot of houses that do development work that have people that just develop tests for applications and do nothing but that all day long. Not a job I would want to do, but people do it. And the reason they do that is you can create applications and then send different types of data to it, different types of scenarios to it to see where it breaks or see if it works before you actually push it out to a live environment and then work with a real database. So that's why you have the ability to have a test database as well. Now at this point, even though our stuff looks different, there is no way I'm going to be changing any of it unless it specifically asks me to. And the reason for that is the new version, obviously in the old version they would just say pool 5, and here it's got like an entire Ruby command here that obviously is working off of some sort of threading or multitasking, and I really don't want to mess with that. The setting is still 5, so don't touch it. And what we're doing here is we're setting up the default for SQLite 3, and then that could also apply to all the other modes. And there are, folks, plenty of people that when they do deploy the Ruby applications, they just stick with SQLite 3, depending on the complexity of the application. When it gets to be a really heavy load on the database, that's when you see people opting to move to what we call a real database product. MySQL is very typical as a database on the back end. All right, so he's got a little sidebar here. It says, what is YAML? And it's another one of these recursive acronyms. So all these like open source people have to recurse everything. So it says YAML ain't markup language. So that's what it means. The interesting thing about it though is it is like some languages, and Ruby uses the convention that when they do indents, they don't use tabs, they use 2 spaces. And the white space matters for YAML files. That's important to know too. So if I got rid of that white space right there that I have highlighted in gray, it would break things. So you don't want to do that. All right. So just because we created a project doesn't mean that we also created the database, or does it? And that those of you that have read the book and are reading this chapter right here already know that answer. But if I were to create a database for my project, I would type the command that you see here, which is rake database create. And I just want to give you a little bit of a preface on what rake is. Okay, and he's got a sidebar there on the next page. Basically, it's a way to take certain types of tasks, and I'm not really sure what the best word is. Maybe consider it kind of like scripting them out, but you're not really scripting them. It's just it's kind of like a preset bank of commands that we use for Ruby for shortcuts for doing things. And building a database is one of the things we'll do. Another thing that we're going to do pretty often, and you guys might want to make special note of this as we move forward, when we start to build applications and then we go in there and we, let's say, add a column to the database table or remove something or just do something different with the database or add tables to it, for example. One of the commands we'll come back in here and do quite often is we'll type rake db migrate. And a migration is really kind of a way to kind of get the database to refresh and recognize that its structure changed. So it's kind of like the equivalent of like you can work on a database, but it really doesn't change until you migrate it back into the application. All right. In this case, we're going to try to do a create, and it should get aborted. You know why? Because part of the process of creating a new project creates that database automatically for us. However, if you were building something completely from scratch, or if you wanted to just build a database, that would be the command to do it. And yes, you can create multiple databases if you wish for an application. Not always a recommended thing to do. Now, the next command that they're going to have us type here is kind of interesting. Notice it says rake db create all. And what this command is going to do, and you can go ahead and type it, it's not going to hurt a darn thing. Is this will go through. Once again, it will give you the same error message because basically these have already been created because of our YAML file. It would go through and create the test database and the production database all at the same time. But because of the settings in that YAML file, because those were all set to default, they're all working off of the default structure, which is their SQLite database. All right, next thing we're going to do. Let's try this next command. Now we're issuing a Rails command. So what that means, you know, you got rake commands, you got Rails commands, and pretty soon we're going to see interactive Ruby commands. And what this Rails command does is this actually brings up the ability to interact with our database on the console level. And you can see I got a error here from typing that. I either didn't type it right or something has changed. All right. And so what does my error say? It says Rails DB console. Typed it right. So what happened? When I see a screen like this from a command prompt, I'm going to find it now. Here it is. I'll just move that right up to the top. It's telling me something's wrong, right? It's saying, hey, clearly you don't know what you're doing. Correct? Bingo. Very astute, Aaron. And I love it when you guys catch the things before I get it right. My prompt right now is in the projects folder. Could it be that my rake commands were also in the projects folder and wouldn't work? Absolutely. So this is a valuable little lesson here. So let's go ahead and, being at the prompt, I'm going to type cd blog, and now I'm going to up arrow, and I'm actually like try all those commands again. So we did rake db create. Should I get an error message on this one? Let's see. Well, how do you like that, right? Can't create a database for something that doesn't exist. And notice what it did automatically. The development one was already there. It went ahead and created the development database. That's the one that we're using, so it kind of recreated it, and it created the test one. If I issue the next command, which was create all, it might give us a couple little errors. And they're not really errors. It says already exists, and then it also created a production database for us too. Do I need all three? You guys already should know the answer to that at this point. No. But now, since I created the development database and the production database, it could be deployed. The production database is necessary for actual live deployment. That's important to know. All right. Now let's go ahead and run Rails DB console. Give it a second. And then notice what it does. It gives us a SQLite prompt. Now this, folks, is a prompt where you do your database work. This would be the equivalent if you were doing database work from a MySQL prompt. Can I just get a really quick show of hands? How many of you have had advanced databases? Who did you guys have it with? Venkis? Her? Nobody with Cheryl?
I did.
You had it with Cheryl? Online?
Yes.
And the primary product, of course, you use in that class is SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio as your front end. Did any of those teachers make you interface with MySQL?
Yeah.
They did. And did you learn how to do any stuff from a prompt?
I dealt with that one on PHP. Yeah, we dealt with that one.
Okay. And that's pretty typical. The reason I'm mentioning this to you, all the commands that you guys learned how to type when you were working in SQL Server or MySQL, you can type at these prompts. You can actually use SQL commands at these prompts. However, you guys are going to discover some interesting things. First of all, that we have inside the Rails framework what we call a database abstraction layer. And what that allows us to do is use other prompts to do that work for us in a different type of syntax. So if you were interested in typing SQL-like commands, you can come here, type in your SQL commands, create your tables, insert records, change, you want to write like triggers and, views and all those kind of things. You can do all those things from these prompts, just like you would a MySQL prompt. In fact, notice here it says enter .help for usage hints. And then you could kind of read through, and it would tell you some of the commands that you can issue. And it also indicates in an appendix. So in Appendix B, you can go into that appendix and learn your basic SQL commands if you are so interested. All right. So at this point, we're not going to really do anything at this prompt. So go ahead and type .exit. And really, for the most part, that's about as much work as we're going to do at that prompt. It is good to know, though, that you can come to this prompt and type your SQL commands and have them work. Okay. Some little quirk differences between this and MySQL and standard T-SQL, which is what you learned in advanced databases. But for the most part, very similar. All right, the next command we're going to try is rake db migrate. And this is one that you'll get to know intimately, especially when you start to make changes to your application and it seems like something didn't work, or, oh wow, I forgot to migrate the database. And remember, that's usually when you're changing something in the database. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Now, of course, we didn't make any changes to our database right now, did we? Right? So it's coming back with nothing, really. Notice what it says in this little box here, because you can use databases other than SQLite. Like if you were connecting to MySQL and you didn't have all your stuff configured correctly, it might send back a MySQL error message. All right. All right, we took a short break and now we're back. And we are at the, what page are we on? Top of page 32 here. And we're looking at the section here entitled Creating an Article Model. And there's a lot to learn here, and we are going to delve deeper into this concept when we get to the database chapters. But for the most part, we're going to just poke around and just use the tools right now to get some things up and running. The next command that we're instructed to type, and oh, by the way, maybe I didn't mention this earlier, but if you guys are lazy typers, you could actually highlight from the PDF, copy, come down to your prompt, and right-click and paste. If you're using Windows 10, you can actually Control-V right at the prompt, which is kind of nice. And so this command that we're typing is Rails generate model. Now typically, and you can see from the box right below the command I highlighted, that there's actually a bunch of different parameters or arguments that you can throw at this thing. And we're running it without initially, and what this is going to do hypothetically is nothing because we're not telling it to do anything. So it should kind of give us a spit back of like, hey, you don't know what you're doing. Where is it all? Way too far. All right, let's. You gotta go back slowly to find the last thing I typed. All right, that's a very verbose message, isn't it? There we go. All right, so basically what it's telling me is, hey, you don't know what you're doing. But it does give you a lot of the little extras here, information-wise, that might be helpful if you're trying to figure that out. So, including a list of the most common commands. All right. So, we're actually now going to type the full command. So I'm actually going to up arrow at my prompt. That'll repeat what I just typed. And now we're going to actually add a word to it. We're going to add article to it. And basically what we're going to be doing is we are going to generate a data model is really what it is. It's a data model that will attach itself to the database and create some stuff. And you can see from the little box down here that it's going to show you the output it's going to do in advance. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter, and then we should get a message that looks similar to that one in the aftermath. All right, and then what it does, notice it. The first thing it does is it invokes active record. An active record is the tool that's our database abstraction tool, and there are chapters in the book on this, so we are going to focus on this a little bit later on. And then it also goes in and it creates. It shows you what files it created. And notice it put something into the database folder, into migration. It also put something into the app folder for models. And notice what it titled it. And then it also created those same components in the test database in the test folders. So every time you create something inside of Rails, it also creates the test versions typically automatically for us. And that way we can test things. All right, so what we'll do now in the aftermath of this, and I want you guys to kind of get in this habit at least initially as we're working on this stuff, is actually go and look for these things. And I want you to notice a couple of things that happen here. That we are creating something in the database directory. And guess what? That is stuff that's going to get migrated, and that's why it's in the migrate folder. And what's going to happen here, notice that it names stuff automatically. I told it to generate a model called article, and it's really important to note the fact that it's a capital A. And then notice that anywhere else article is referred to, it is with a lowercase a, and it is adding a time and date stamp to every entry. So what you create is not going to look like what's in the book. So this was done in 2013. Ours is going to say 2017. So I'm actually going to go into the folder structure, find that database folder, find the migration folder, and then notice that there is a file with today's time and date, and create articles, plural. Notice the S. We created a singular article here. We got a plural here. It is a Ruby file. It's got an RB extension. You want to take a look at it? Feel free. That's all it is. So there's a Ruby command here that does what? It creates a table called articles. And apparently inside that command it's also doing some sort of a timestamp automatically. That's just an automatic thing that it does. I'm going to go ahead and close that and get it out of the way. I just want to show you that you should get into this habit of knowing what it's creating, and really it is telling you right here what it's creating very explicitly. All right. And that's what the guy's having us do here at the bottom of this page, which is to open the file and take a look. The other one it wants us to do is take a look at this and take a look at the code. The point of this little part is to try to figure out what's going on. Notice that the file now has some additional components to it. It started out with just the creating of the table, and we should have learned when you guys are doing those like real basic fundamentals, what does a do? What does that imply? Maybe a loop. Yeah, maybe a loop. Yeah, that's what it is. It's a loop. And it's like their way of indicating that it's a do-while loop. Notice that it has kind of like this generic thing that it's using to kind of attach to each one of the objects inside of here. And then take a look at what we just added, or what is added. And it says t.string, title. t.text, body. t.datetime, published at. Somebody tell me what's happening there. Educated guess.
Creating HTML document.
Somebody says we're creating an HTML document.
That's what. Well, no, it's a database.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, we are creating a database table. Remember, the default thing it created on its own was a timestamp. So what it's saying is that all your database entries, every record that you're going to add, will automatically be timestamped. But what this is telling us is that we are creating some data types, a string, some text, and a date time. Titled, title, body, and published at. So what are we doing with the table? We are creating columns in the table is what we're doing. We will not have created those columns until we run the migration. All right? So we are going to go ahead and we are going to add these things. And I think he's asking us at this point to do this. Right? Is he asking us to change it at this point? He is. All right, so let's go ahead, or she, I'm not really sure. So I shouldn't have closed that file so quick. Let's go back and open it back up. So once again, it's in the blog DB migrate folder. We're going to open that up with Notepad++, and we're going to add a couple of things. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to copy right from the book, that's fine, and come into Notepad++ and paste it in. And I'm going to use spaces to move everything over. Now he's got an extra blank line here. Do you guys think that matters much? Probably not. I'm going to go ahead and do a Control S to save that. And then the next command that we're going to type. Now you guys, I'm sure, are capable of typing that in all on your own, or copy pasting it just like I did. It's an advanced skill. And now I'm going to come back to the prompt and I'm going to type rake db : migrate. When I run this command, what this does is it goes to that database folder called migrate and looks to see if there's any pending migrations, or in other words, changes to our database. So I'm going to run this command and give it a second to execute. What did it do? Created a table called articles. Took 0.0023 seconds and succeeded. Supposedly. All right, and this is where we enter in with that other tool, that SQLite browser tool. So if we wanted to actually go in and look at the table, we could at this point. I'm not really too overly eager to go do that at the moment, but we're just going to take it on faith, at least at the moment, that worked. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create another component of the MVC architecture. Right now, we created a model by virtue of creating a table for articles with 4 columns, right? Title, body, published at, what was the other one, and timestamp. Now we're going to generate a controller for articles. Now, if you remember a controller, what that's going to do is it's kind of our traffic director for the application. It's the component that allows us to have smart URLs. So really what's going to happen is we're going to be able to type blog/articles, and then it will look for articles in the controller and execute whatever code goes with that article. That's the point of it. But the generate command does a really, really powerful thing. So let's go ahead and first type that in. Now notice, once again, lowercase a for articles, plural, where the model was an uppercase A, singular. Think about it like this. We'll talk about this in the database chapter. When we create a data table that holds articles, right? We call that table article. Then the individual things that go in it are the articles, plural. So that's kind of the mindset there. This is one of the weird conventions that this language has. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter at the prompt and let it do its work. And once again, it should create the types of things that are happening here. Notice the things that are being created. We are creating articles controller in the controllers folder. We're creating a view for articles. We're also doing the same thing in the test folder. We're also creating some helpers. We'll talk about helpers later on in the course. And we're also putting in assets for JavaScript and for style sheets. One thing I do want you to notice here, though, is even though we have what look like standard JavaScript extensions and standard CSS extensions, that there's an additional extension appended to the end. And these are 2 new technologies that have been gaining a lot of favor, especially in the open source world, where we have this thing called CoffeeScript that allows people to kind of shortcut write commands for JavaScript, and also SCSS, which is a shortcut way to write CSS, and then when your application compiles, it's converted to standard JavaScript and standard CSS. And that's really kind of a standard Ruby approach that you see those assets. But notice that instead of creating one big JavaScript file or one big CSS file or something like that, you create lots of little components that are all customized to very specific functions. And that separates the concerns and allows you to move things around and change them in a much more elegant fashion. All right. He does describe here what these files do. And then the next thing that we're going to learn here, once again, is another super powerful command. And I'm going to tell you what, this is probably the most powerful command that you'll see, this concept of scaffolding. Scaffolding is kind of the same thing that happens if you were to compare it to building the whole application in the first place. In other words, by typing one command, we are going to perform a complex set of actions here with one command. right, so let's go ahead and type this in. And what I might suggest is a copy paste here, so because if you do mess it up, then things are messed up. And what's really important here I broke it. And actually, you know what? Do you see what happened? Who can tell me what I did wrong? My skip migration command, see how it was on the second line? When I pasted it, it pasted to a separate prompt after the fact. So it read the line break in the book as an enter and tried to run the command and gave me an error. So what I would really need to do, but that's not smart, is it? Because it's just going to do the same thing again. All right, so the only way to really fix this is to do that and to insert some spaces right here. So copy paste with caution. Sometimes what I do as a trick when I run into these kind of problems, folks, is I will actually copy paste something into like a text editor and get it all in one line. And just for example, let's bring up the Notepad++, make a new tab here, and then you can see how it's pasting it on two separate lines. So when you suspect that that might be the case, this is really a good learning thing. You could come in here, do what I just did, which is move it onto the same line, then copy it all and paste it at the prompt. So I'm coming back and I'm actually going to get rid of all this stuff here and repaste it. Now it's all together. We're going to let it do its work. And now it's prompting us. Is everybody with me so far? Everybody's okay? Okay. All right, so with this one, it's asking, we have a conflict. Now, why do you suppose we might have a conflict? Because of my errant command above. That's the most likely reason. So, what should I do here? Y. Yeah, that's my guess. I'm going to just say Y, capital Y, notice. And anywhere here where I have conflicts, I'm just going to choose basically to overwrite. So what the scaffolding is doing, this is kind of an interesting thing. And the way the author approaches this, I think, is kind of interesting because he has you do one action, then he kind of has you do this other action. But here's what scaffolding does, folks. So it says Rails generates scaffold article. That's our model, right, that we already created. And then we're declaring, right in the command line, we want a title, that's a string, body, that's text, publish that's a date time, skip the migration. So what's it doing? It is generating not only the model with the fields, right? So it's creating the article table, it's creating 3 columns, the timestamp is an automatic, it's not doing the migration right now, but otherwise it would. But it's also creating all the other stuff that was generated by the previous command and building it all out for us. So if you know the stuff that you want to put into a table off the bat, you can do it all from a command line in one fell swoop without going in and editing a database file. So really, when the guy was asking us or showing us to put stuff in that database file, we shouldn't have done it. Those weren't edits that we needed to make. Did we break anything? No. All right. So at this point, he is asking us to go ahead and bring up localhost 3000 and notice the URL articles. Now, I do need to run the server first. So here at the prompt, I am going to type Rails server or optionally just Rails S. Either one works and does the same thing. So let's let that launch. Okay, the web server is up and running and listening on port 3000. Now I can actually click the link right inside the PDF and it should go ahead and launch. Now upon first launch, the first page load is usually slow. So be patient with it. All right. Yay! All that work for that? Right. The truth is, we really didn't do any work. We typed really a series of a few commands, but really are learning more about the concepts of what's driving it. So notice that it creates some HTML, so I'm just going to do a view source on this and see what it created. Bunch of stuff. I didn't type any of this stuff in, somebody did it. Okay, great. And then it goes ahead and creates the structure that inside of a table format for stuff that's inside of this table. And notice what else it gives us right off the bat. It shows us the columns we created, and it also gives us a link to create a new article. I didn't do that. Where'd that come from? Well, here's what it does. This is what the Rails framework gives us, folks. It recognizes that we created a data model for a table. It automatically generated a template for the contents of that data model. That's what we were just looking at. It also automatically generated a form that directly interfaces with the database and allows us to insert content. So for example, I typed in some content, and now I'm going to click Create Article, and it just does it. It gives me an edit capability. I can go back and change it and update it, and then I can click my back button and go back to the main page, which now just displays a list of articles. And more importantly, allows me to view, to edit, or destroy. At this point, it's most likely that your destroy will not work, because that actually has to be coded. But clearly the other two do work. You've seen the edit interface already? And destroy. Says, are you sure? Maybe it'll work. I guess it worked. All right. Now I want you to stop and think for just a moment about what we just did, and think about other languages that you guys have learned. And most likely the one that's going to draw the strongest correlation here is going to be PHP for you guys, where you have done stuff where you've created a front end where you are able to create something, add it to the database, pull it back from the database and see it. But the infrastructure for doing all that stuff was all manual. Here, it's completely automated. What gave us the capability? The fact that we could integrate the database, that we could create a data model, that we could create a controller, and that we could do scaffolding, and those things in combination. It's the scaffolding one that's really the powerful one, because the scaffolding realizes that not only are you building this data model and table in the database, but you also want to do full CRUD operations: create, retrieve, update, and destroy. And it's all handled automatically. Now, if you guys do switch back and take a look at your prompt, which is running the web server, you are going to notice that all the actions that you took on that web page are logged. Isn't that interesting? So and this is how real web servers work, folks. Anytime there's an interaction, those servers log everything, and they go into log files. So if there's a problem, it shows. If it works,
Yeah.
it shows. And this is pretty interesting. So this prompt is going to keep running just like this. Now, here's the thing. I want to do some more stuff, right? And if you look at the book, and I was just kind of checking our spot here in the book, we did take a look, and hopefully things loaded up and worked for you.
Wait, did you do something?
Okay, here in the classroom, I just was making sure that everybody was okay. We had one person with some issues that we're hoping to resolve. And some of you may have already worked through this stuff, and you may discover that sometimes the only way to fix stuff is to backtrack and just do all the commands over again, because if you mess up something in the early phases, that cascades down. So if you didn't create your model appropriately, so you didn't have the right fields in the table, then your controller isn't going to be right either. And that's my guess as to what happened. So at this point, I still have my web server running, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop it, because it's good to know how to stop it. So in the command prompt window, I'm just going to do a Control-C, and it's asking me terminate batch job, and I'm going to say yes with the capital Y, and then I'm back to a prompt. On the next page here, that's top of page 38, according to my PDF, or 41, depending on how you look at the book, 38. We're going to type another command, and this one does span 2 lines, so I'm going to be preemptive this time and take it right to Notepad++ and make it so it's all on one line. You saw how I did that? And now I'm just going to Control-A and copy all that and paste it to my prompt. I'm going to paste it to the prompt and then talk about it a second before I go ahead and press Enter. So what we're going to be doing here, and it's fairly intuitive to read. It says Rails generate migration, add excerpt and location to articles. Okay, well that's what the migration's called. And then if you look at the next 2 declarations, it says excerpt string and location string. So what this is doing is we are creating 2 new columns for our articles, one called an excerpt and one called a location. Now the thought there, if you guys ever really looked at blogs, right, the way that most blogging engines work is you visit somebody's blog and they'll have a home page and you'll get a list of blog entries, right? Newest ones first typically. And you don't usually get the whole blog entry, you get what they call an excerpt, which is maybe like the first 4 or 5 lines of the blog. And then they're also putting in a location thing here too, so that you could put in, hey, we're in Racine, hey, we're in Milwaukee, hey, whatever. And that's just what the author is choosing to do here. So we are going to generate a migration. We're giving it a name, and the reason we're naming it so verbosely is so we know exactly what it does. And that's the thing you're going to learn here. Another convention in this language is the strong encouragement to be very verbose with what you name things, so when you come back and look at something, you're not guessing. So I'm going to know from looking at the stuff in my folders, oh, this is when I added the excerpt and location to the articles table. That's pretty clear from the title. Going ahead and pressing enter. And then the other thing that I was showing people here is the fact that I did bring up my SQLite browser, and I'm going to actually bring that up and show it to you guys. So I have that installed. And the thing that you do with this tool is you choose Open Database, you find your project. Mine's in the Projects folder, under Blog. Then you go to the Database folder, and inside there you will see your databases. We are in development mode, so that's the one I'm going to open. Then it comes in here, and right on the main page it will show you the structure or the schema for your database. And then it also, if you go to Browse Data, you can actually come up here and choose the table that we created, the articles table, and then notice the items that are in this table. Now we just added 2 columns, right? And I thought we generated a migration, but I don't see those columns there. Well, what we really generated, folks, was the commands for the migration. We still need to actually execute the migration, but before we do that, we want to go and actually look at the migration file, which is this step here. So we're going to go to our file folder, go to the DB folder, migrate, well, I guess we were already there, and here's the one that we just created, add excerpt and location to articles RV. Open that up in your text editor and take a look. And really what we're trying to see is that what we type from the command line is being properly added to the migration file before it's run. That's really what I'm checking for. And then over time you'll get to trust the fact that it's just doing it. But what we're doing right now is we're letting it, we're going in and we're manually looking just so that we're sure that it's working. So I'm going to go ahead and get that out of the way and get this out of the way. And back at the prompt, I am now going to type rake db migrate. Press enter. That's a good sign. Added 2 columns. If I now go back to my SQLite browser, and I don't know if it has a refresh button here, it sure does. And maybe what I need to do is actually change and come back. Yep, and there, now you can see how it added the columns. So you can see that the migration worked. So that's why I like to use this tool and have it like at the ready, because it gives me just a visual way to see what I'm doing is actually happening. All right. So that command clearly worked. All right. And now he's got some subsequent stuff here that we're looking at. And notice what it does here now. It says Rails generate scaffold article, title, location, excerpt, body, published at, skip migration. Why are we skipping migration? We just did it. But what it's also doing is the scaffolding. Remember this about the scaffolding. The scaffolding is creating all the stuff inside the controller that allows you to create new, to edit, to destroy. Once again, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to my text editor. I'm going to use it kind of as a buffer, so I'm creating a new blank document. And I'm trying to get these commands all in one line, like that. Not like this, like that. And then I'm going to highlight all that, copy it, back to the prompt, paste it in, and press enter. Okay, we're getting a conflict. I'm going to say yes to overwrite. Yes to overwrite, because some of this stuff we've already done. That's why it's doing it. Just like the last time, we had already done it. And I could choose no, but what the heck. Not a big deal. Saying yes to all. And I'm assuming that if I hit the A key, it's probably yes to all. And you can see the author does say, when asked, say yes. All right. Now if we go ahead and we run our server again, which is what you should be doing. So type Rails S. Back to the browser. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to have it just load the root. And give it a second to do its work. Yay, you're on Rails. Oops. Yeah, articles, that's right. Thank you very much. Now I did that kind of on purpose. And you want to know what the purpose for that was? It's kind of twofold. First of all, to show you that we didn't create anything for the root. We didn't create a controller for index, just for articles. Secondly, because I want to make sure that I'm not refreshing the new article page. I want to be sure I'm really getting a refresh, is the other reason for it. So now you can see that it is showing the column headers for the two things that I added. And so I am going to go ahead and click new article, and you can see it added the fields for it automatically. It's pretty powerful stuff, folks. So type something new in here. We're in the scene. I'm copy and pasting it a whole bunch of times. Maybe a few more. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Create Article. And then I'm going to also click my back button to go back to the listing. I'm going to click on Show to make sure it works. It does. Let's click on Edit. That seems to be working. Let's go back. I'm not going to click on Destroy at this point. It's probably good to have something in there. And the point here is that you experiment a little bit to get it working. All right, so now we're moving on. We're on page 40. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some validation to our application. Now this is something that you guys probably have learned how to do in HTML class a little bit, and JavaScript class a little bit, and PHP class a little bit, and probably all the different classes, anywhere where you're providing any sort of like input mechanism for a user to be able to interface with an application. Often one of the considerations you have to make is providing some form of validation. One thing that would make a lot of sense for a blog, as the author is indicating here, is the fact that it would be nice if you don't allow the users to create an article without a title, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add some really basic validation, and we're going to look for this particular file here. So we're going to go to the App Models folder and look for Article RB. So let's do that. Bring up our file folder. So we're going to go to App, Models, and there's Article. We're going to right-click, Open. You can see I have an empty class here. I'm going to tab twice, space twice. That's ridiculously simple validation, folks. And it's pretty simple. It's not looking for a pattern, although you can insert regular expressions into this language. So if you guys remember what a regular expression is. But in this case, we're just looking for the presence of a title and a body. So the article, the blog article's got to have a name for it, and it's got to have some stuff in it, or what's the point, right? And you don't really have blog entry without those two things. These could also be listed separately. So I could do it like this. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, later in the book, the author switches to this format, if I remember right. And you start comparing files and you go, oh, it's not the same. But either one works just fine. This approach is fine, or if you want to go back to this, that's fine too. Same difference. So we're validating the presence of two different fields. Go ahead and Control S to save. All right. They're making the assumption that your web server is still running. It is, right? So now they want us to go back to the application. And notice, we just did that on the fly. We didn't stop the web server. We didn't, right? It just worked. And now I'm going to go ahead and type this, and I'm going to put in a location. I'm going to put in an excerpt, but no title and no body, create article. Really quick and simple little validation. Not only that, built-in error message, built-in CSS highlighting. And it might not be the stuff that you like, but on a rudimentary level, at least it works and it looks okay-ish, right? It's not too bad. So, excuse me, go ahead and give it a title. Go ahead, give it a body, and click Create, and this time it works. So that's a real rudimentary form of validation. We will do more of that as we progress. All right, so one of the next things that we're going to do here is we're going to go take a look at the controllers file. So I'm going to bring up my file window here, and we're going to app controllers articles. So app controllers articles controller. Open in your text editor, and let's do a little side by side here for comparison. And then I want you to notice here how there's certain things that were placed in here. How did this stuff all come to be, first of all? I don't know, it just happened, right? Yeah, this is a result when we generated a controller. It will automatically generate all the basic components for any standard database interaction. So for example, index would be for the root of that controller, so for the root of articles. And notice it says articles equals article all. And what that simple command is, we haven't really learned about these yet, is it's just saying instantiate a version of articles that shows all the articles that are in the table. Real simple syntax. Showing it, well, showing it is just bringing it up on the screen. So there's nothing special there. Creating a new one invokes a command called article new. Edit just does what it does. It allows you to access all the fields. There's no special commands in there, but you could put some in there. If you were creating something from scratch, then it does a number of different things. Well, most notably, it pulls in all the parameters of whatever you're creating that's new. And then it runs a few different commands that generates both hashed versions of the data and HTML output formats for the stuff that you've created. And those HTML format files are things that we can go in and tweak and adjust. So if you're wondering, can I put different structures on this, or can I apply different CSS to it, or can I do this to it, or does it have to be in a table? Can I put it in a div, or can I, yes, you can do all those things, and those would be the spots where you do that. And then, of course, for destroy, that allows us to actually run the destroy command, which removes something from the database. And then I also want you to notice that there is a private section at the end here that usually you don't want to mess with at all. Those are system generated automatically. So the task there was really just to take a look, and then just to keep in mind that anytime that we're executing something from the browser, folks, and notice how the URL structure here, it has nothing to do with file names. Articles, the first thing after the root of the website, that indicates which controller file we're going to. And then if I were doing articles and click new article, notice at the bottom of my screen down here when I hover how it does articles new. So really what that does is it finds that controller file, articles controller, and it looks for new, and then it does whatever it says. Conversely, if I were to look at show, notice what it's trying to show is article number 3, because that's the ID of the article. Edit brings up that article, and I'm looking down here as I'm saying this, article number 3, and then triggers the edit method inside of the controller, and destroy triggers, well, destroy, although it doesn't list down there, which is curious. All right, that's the chapter in a nutshell. So we went really kind of through the whole process of building an application in a microcosm. The next steps, what's going to follow this chapter, is now we're going to start to dig into each one of the areas that we just kind of went through really quick and hastily in depth. So we're going to learn about the database stuff a lot more in depth. We're going to learn more about the output screens. We're going to learn more about all the different components. So if you want to experiment with this stuff, feel free. Create a whole bunch of applications, keep doing it. If for some reason it didn't work, I would implore you to just go back to the beginning of the chapter and start over. It's not unusual when you're working with this language for that to happen. When we come back next week, I'm going to push really hard on you the concept of versioning, because we're going to be building upon what we just built. So if you don't build this chapter right, your subsequent chapters will have issues too. Okay, so we're going to talk about versioning and how to save multiple versions of the work that you're working on. All right, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much, and have a good night.